Welcome back. Indian troops have martyred another youth in occupied Kashmir. The occupation forces have martyred 15 youngsters in the occupied valley over the last 30 days. Locals say the Indian forces martyred the civilian during a cordon and search operation in Pulwama district. Meanwhile, pro-Kashmiri freedom activist Bashir Ahmed Qureshi has been arrested in Srinagar for organizing anti-India protests. India's lockdown and communications blackout in the occupied valley has now entered 114th day. US Ambassador to Islamabad Paul Jones says Pakistan has a sovereign right to decide its future with regards to the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. Last week, US Assistant Secretary of State Alice Wells called CPEC a debt trap for Pakistan. Speaking in Lahore, Jones said the US does not expect everyone to totally agree with her speech, as it was meant to start a debate on CPEC. The ambassador said all development projects should be transparent and discussed openly. Earlier, Pakistan and China strongly criticized Alice Wells' remarks, saying CPEC is a win-win for both countries. The chief of the US-led naval coalition in the Gulf says Qatar and Kuwait have agreed to join the maritime security mission. Colonel John Conklin said the two countries will provide personnel and patrol boats. The United States established a maritime coalition earlier this year in response to a series of oil attacks on the Gulf. The US and its allies blame Iran for these assaults, but Tehran rejects the accusations. France is also leading a European maritime mission to monitor Gulf waters. The US has asked the head of the Libyan National Army, Khalifa Haftar, to end his offensive on Tripoli. The State Department says steps to suspend hostilities and find a political resolution to the conflict were discussed when US officials met with Haftar. Both sides talked about a proposed ceasefire to the conflict, which has claimed over 1,000 lives. The delegation included White House Deputy National Security Advisor Victoria Coates and US Ambassador to Libya Richard Norland. They said Washington fully supports Libya's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Washington did not reveal the location of the meeting. Talks on Syria's political future have collapsed after government representatives walked out. Syria's state media says the government pulled out of the second meeting of the Constitutional Committee in Geneva on dispute over its proposed agenda. Opposition members of the Constitutional Committee have accused Damascus of stalling tactics. The talks are meant to be a step forward in what the UN says will be a long road to political rapprochement. The Constitutional Committee is made up of 15 members, each from the government, opposition and civil society. At a meeting in Cairo, Arab League foreign ministers rejected the US recognition of Israeli settlements in the occupied West Bank. In a joint statement, ministers said the decision has no legal effect and is a clear violation of UN resolutions. The Arab League Secretary General Ahmed Aboul Gheit said the move will have a negative impact on the Palestinian peace process.
On which basis would the Palestinians negotiate with the Israelis if this occupation does not exist and that there are no occupied lands or settlers taking over the lands?
The UN Security Council has urged Lebanon to keep protests peaceful after clashes erupted between anti-government protesters and Hezbollah supporters. Tensions escalated after demonstrators blocked a main bridge in Beirut. In a statement, Security Council members said political parties and demonstrators to meet and talk to solve the country's problems. Lebanon has faced 5 weeks of anti-government protests over corruption and bad governance. Demonstrators are demanding the removal from power of the entire ruling class. Hezbollah was part of coalition led by Prime Minister Saad al-Hariri, who quit on October 29th. A 6.4 magnitude earthquake has killed 3 people in Albania. It sent panicked residents rushing into the streets and caused a building to collapse. Defense Ministry says 1 person died after panicking and jumping out of a building during the quake in the capital city of Tirana. The US Geological Survey says the tremor is the strongest earthquake to hit the country in decades. Defense Ministry says firefighters and army staff are helping residents trapped under the rubble. Ukraine says it will cut off gas from a Russian pipeline and begin storing it if Moscow does not renew a transit agreement. State gas company Naftogaz says will start pumping the gas into underground storage facilities from January 1st. Naftogaz chief executive Yuri Vitrenko says Russian gas transiting Ukraine without a corresponding contract will be considered contraband. The existing contract between Russia and Ukraine will expire on December 31st. By then, Russia plans to commission the Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream gas pipelines bypassing Ukrainian territory. Russia says it is ready to conclude a gas transit contract with Ukraine under European Union rules. But talks are complicated by legal wrangling between Russia's Gazprom and Ukraine's Naftogaz. Colombia has expelled 59 Venezuelans for taking part in anti-government protests in the country. The government's migration agency said the Venezuelans were classified as a threat to public order and national security. Colombia's national police conducted raids in bars and restaurants in 5 localities across Bogota. 59 men and women were arrested and held in detention centers in security operations. They were handed over to Venezuelan authorities at the Amazonian border crossing. A Colombian immigration official said foreigners will not be allowed to affect the country's peace. There have been unprecedented mass protests in Colombia against President Ivan Duque's government since last Thursday. In DR Congo, 2 people have been killed in clashes with police in the eastern town of Beni. Security forces opened fire at demonstrators outside a UN base, protesting against the killing of 8 civilians at the hands of Allied Democratic Forces militants. Angry people set fire to the mayor's office and several UN buildings over the government's failure to stop the attacks. Congo's president said the country's military and UN peacekeepers will launch joint operations to beef up security in the troubled region. The ADF has been active in Congo since 1995 and is accused of killing thousands of civilians over the last 5 years. In Pakistan, at least 8 people have been killed and 20 others wounded in a road accident in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. The accident happened when a bus collided with a truck on a highway near the Dera Ismail Khan district. The bus was traveling from Karachi to Mardan. In Germany, burglars have stolen 3 diamond jewelry sets from one of Europe's largest treasure collections, the Dresden Green Vault. German media reports the stolen items are valued at over $1 billion. Saxony's ruler Augustus the Strong created the collection in 1723 in what is one of the world's oldest museums. Police said the thieves targeted the historic section of the building. Museum director Marion Ackerman described the stolen items as priceless. She said it would be impossible to sell them on the open market.
I don't need to tell you how shocked we are. Also about the brutality of this break-in. Just to put this into context, this is of invaluable art historic and culture historic value.
Kulturhistorischen Wert handelt.
The death toll from a measles epidemic in Samoa has surged to 32. Official data shows infection rates continue to soar out of control in the Pacific island nation. Government has declared a state of emergency to contain the outbreak, launching a compulsory vaccination program. Government says it has identified almost nearly 2,500 cases of measles last week. It said 28 among the dead were children below the age of 4. A total of 57,000 people in the nation of 200,000 have been vaccinated in recent weeks. Meanwhile, UNICEF is distributing over 100,000 doses of measles vaccine to Samoa to boost immunization efforts. In Italy, x-rays showing the broken bones of victims of domestic abuse are on display at a Milan hospital. The exhibition coincides with the International Day to End Violence Against Women.
Trauma surgeon Maria Grazia Vattatori has been practicing medicine for 26 years. During her career, she's dealt with numerous battered women. She wanted the public to see these patients' x-rays so they can observe the stark reality of domestic violence firsthand.
Racconta la realtà.
This exhibition tells the story of reality. It is not fiction. We could also have exposed photos of bruises, cuts, burns, people disfigured with acid, but we didn't want to do that.
Ma non volevamo fare questo.
142 Italian women were killed in acts of domestic violence in 2018, while 538,000 were targeted with physical or sexual violence by their partners over the past 5 years. Most women are still reluctant to report such crimes, meaning these are very conservative figures.
dichiarando una dinamica.
There were 142 women murdered last year in 2018 alone, so on average one woman every 3 days. This figure is always tragic. The number 3 often appears in the figures on violence. 1 in 3 women suffers violence. 1 woman dies from beatings every 3 days.
Questo per esempio è un indice.
Experts say violence against women in Italy transcends class, race or socio-economic background, making it a nationwide problem. And while awareness of the problem has increased in recent years, it continues to persist. And of course, this isn't a problem limited to this country. The UN estimates 87,000 women were killed around the world in 2017. Half of them were murdered at the hands of their spouse or a family member.
For the first time ever, marine biologists have recorded the heart rate of a blue whale in the wild. It was done by attaching an electrocardiogram with suction cups to the body of the world's largest animal. Researchers recorded 9 hours of data from an adult male whale about 72 feet long in Monterey Bay off California's coast. They say the blue whale can lower its heart rate as little as 2 beats per minute as it lunges under the ocean surface for food. The maximum heart rate they recorded was 37 beats per minute after the whale returned to the surface from a foraging dive. A report by the UN's World Meteorological Organization says greenhouse gas levels in the atmosphere set a new record in 2018. WMO Secretary General Petteri Talas says emissions continue to grow despite the Paris Agreement. More in this report.
2018's greenhouse gas levels show emissions are rising at a rate above the previous decade's average. Carbon dioxide, the biggest contributor to climate change, now stands at 407.8 parts per million. This is up 50% from CO2 levels prior to the Industrial Revolution.
And here we have a carbon dioxide graph showing that we have again broken records in carbon dioxide concentrations, and we have already exceeded 400 ppm level, which was regarded as a critical level. That happened already 2 years ago.
Meanwhile, methane levels were recorded at the highest in the last 20 years, while nitrogen dioxide were recorded at the highest ever.
We have been storing more than 90% of the extra heat that we have produced to the planet to the oceans, and oceans have warmed half degree so far.
WMO Secretary General Petteri Talas warns these figures show humanity failed to make any progress in curbing emissions. He adds the last time the Earth saw such high concentrations of carbon dioxide was 3 to 5 million years ago.
What is good news is that the visibility of these issues is highest ever, and the good news is also that the private sector is more and more interested in finding solutions. So, and we cannot solve this problem without the financial resources of private sector.
Scientists calculate that emissions must fall by 50% by 2030 if global warming is to be limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Should humanity fail to do this, we're likely to face even worse heat waves, droughts and floods in the future.
We're taking a short break. Stay with us. Top US and Chinese negotiators have held another round of talks by telephone on an initial deal to end their trade war. In a statement, China's Ministry of Commerce said the two sides reached a consensus on properly resolving outstanding issues. It said Chinese Vice Premier Liu He spoke with US Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer and Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. Earlier, U.S. National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien said an initial trade agreement with China is still possible by the end of the year. Shares in Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba have soared almost 8% after raising nearly $11 billion in its Hong Kong offering. Alibaba had set the initial share offer price at 176 Hong Kong dollars. It has now jumped over 7.5% to nearly 190 Hong Kong dollars. China's onshore money managers are the biggest new investors in Alibaba's Hong Kong offering. Alibaba's chief financial officer, Maggie Wu, said about one-third of the tranche allocated to international buyers was taken up by first-time Chinese investors. She said the rest was absorbed by investors in the Asia-Pacific region and global funds. The value of the world's most popular cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, has fallen by 35% on fears of Chinese restrictions. Bitcoin is now trading at its lowest level since May. Industry site CoinDesk says the cryptocurrency has slid from over $10,000 last month to a little over $6,500 now. Bitcoin's rise in October came after China's President Xi Jinping praised blockchain in a speech and called for improvement in its development. But Beijing has cracked down on businesses involved in cryptocurrency operations. China's central bank has pledged to continue to target exchanges and asked investors to be wary of digital currencies. Bitcoin touched its all-time high of nearly $20,000 2 years ago. Asian stock markets are trading mixed after China and US chief trade negotiators held trade talks by telephone. Investors have been watching for developments on an anticipated Phase 1 trade deal between the world's two largest economies. Tokyo's Nikkei 225 and Seoul's Kospi have also gained nearly 0.5%. The Hang Seng Index has lost a fraction, despite an 8% rise in Alibaba share prices after yesterday's initial public offering. The Shanghai Composite is trading a fraction lower amid mixed sentiments on trade negotiations. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.